Night my mother announced my brother's promotion to 60 people and forgot to mention I was in the room. I was sitting at a table near the coat check. Not at it, near it. Close enough that the attendant asked me twice if I needed a ticket. I had known about the seating for 11 days. My mother had texted the dinner details in a group message that included my brother Derek, his girlfriend Amanda, 3 of my aunts, and my father. My name was listed under a separate line at the bottom. Overflow seating coordinated separately. I had read it 3 times to make sure I understood what I was reading. I understood exactly. The Carver Room at the St. Hadley Hotel holds 80 guests when arranged for a private event. My parents had booked it for 60. Round tables draped in ivory linen, low centerpieces with white garden roses, handwritten place cards in cream stock tucked into small brass holders. I know this because I walked past those tables on my way to mine. My table was a rectangle pushed against the wall beside the door to the coat room. 2 chairs, a laminated card with my name typed in the hotel's default font, no flowers, a water glass and a bread plate, and the particular silence of a space that was never meant to be anything. My boyfriend Marcus had driven us there in his Honda Civic, the one with the dent in the rear panel from a parking garage in February that he had never bothered to have fixed. He wore a dark navy blazer over a gray shirt, no tie. My mother had suggested, by way of a voicemail left while she knew I was at work, that I might want to encourage him to dress more formally. The message also included a brief note that the evening was very important for Derek's professional relationships, and she hoped we would understand the focus needed to stay on him. Marcus listened to the voicemail on speakerphone while he was making coffee. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "What time should I pick you up?" That was how he was. I want to explain that before anything else because what came later in the evening could make it seem like the point was who he turned out to be. It was not. The point was who he had always been in the 11 months before anyone at that dinner knew his last name. I'm a registered nurse. ICU, Level 1 Trauma Center. 4 years in. My brother Derek is a cardiothoracic surgeon. He finished his fellowship 18 months ago and had just been appointed attending at Mercy General, the kind of position that in my family carries the weight of a religious event. The dinner was my parents' way of marking it publicly, of letting Derek stand in a room full of people who understood exactly what the title meant. I understood what it meant too. I had been the one, during Derek's first year of residency, who drove 2 hours to sit with him in a parking garage at 11 at night, when he called me after losing his first patient. I hadn't told my parents about that call because Derek asked me not to. Some things between us had always been like that. My parents' explanation of my career followed a reliable pattern. When I was in nursing school, my mother described it at dinner parties as Claire taking a practical path. When I passed my boards and started at the trauma center, it became Claire works with the doctors, said in a tone that was meant to sound supportive but functioned like a footnote. My father's version was slightly different. He called it good, stable work with a pause before stable that did all the work a sentence needed. I was 28 when I was part of a rapid response protocol our unit developed that reduced post-surgical complication rates by nearly a third. The protocol was adopted across 2 other hospitals in the region. My name was on the internal report. My father asked at Thanksgiving whether I was thinking about going back to school to advance my career. I asked what he meant by advance. He said, "You know, more options, more responsibility." I said I had significant responsibility. He nodded and reached for the cranberry sauce. 8 months before the promotion dinner, I had met Marcus at a farmer's market on a Saturday morning in October. I had stopped for apple cider. He was standing at the next booth, reading the label on a jar of local honey, with the kind of focused attention most people reserve for legal documents. I made some comment about the cider being better than it had any right to be for the price. He looked up and agreed, and then asked what I did for work. Not in the way people ask to categorize you. In the way that suggested he was actually going to listen to whatever I said. I told him I was a trauma nurse. He asked what the hardest part was. Not the saddest, not the most stressful, the hardest. I told him it was the families. That the clinical work I could compartmentalize, but sitting with someone at 2 a.m. while they waited to find out if a person they loved would still be the same person when they woke up. That part I carried home. He said, "Do you think you do it well?" I said I think I try to do it honestly, which is the closest I can get to well. He said that was probably the right answer. We talked for 40 minutes. He bought the honey. I bought the cider. He asked if I wanted to get coffee nearby and I said yes. And somewhere in the next 2 hours I noticed he was funny and careful with language and that he listened the way almost no one listens, which is without preparing his next sentence while you're still finishing yours. We had been together for 8 months before my parents met him. Not because I was hiding him, because they never asked. My mother's complete due diligence, delivered in a phone call in March, was 4 questions. Is he local? Does he have a steady income? What field? And when I said logistics, there was a pause and she said, "Well, that's practical, I suppose." And then she asked me if I wanted the leftover pasta from Sunday dinner. Marcus ran what he called a small investment fund with a focus on healthcare and rural infrastructure. This was technically accurate the way calling the Pacific Ocean a large body of water is technically accurate. I know this now. At the time I knew that he worked long hours, that he sometimes flew to meetings he was vague about, and that there was a document on his kitchen counter once, briefly visible, that said Reed Webb Capital Series B, Healthcare Infrastructure Portfolio. Dense with numbers in the column on the right that I did not look at closely because it felt like reading someone's mail. I asked him once what the fund actually did. He said they identified gaps in rural healthcare access and put money toward filling them. Hospitals, clinics, equipment, staffing infrastructure. I said that sounds like it matters. He said he hoped it did. I let it go because the answer was complete and because it didn't change anything about the person sitting across from me at the table. There were 2 other small things I noticed over those months. He received a call once when we were hiking, stepped about 30 feet away to take it, and when he came back, his voice had shifted slightly, the way people's voices shift when they've been in a meeting. He also knew, with a specificity that seemed out of proportion to idle interest, quite a lot about hospital funding structures, insurance reimbursement rates, and the particular budget pressures that made rural health systems collapse. He spoke about these things the way someone speaks about a subject they've spent years inside of. I stored this alongside the other small inconsistencies and did nothing with any of it, because none of it changed what mattered, which was that he saw me clearly from the first 40 minutes and had not stopped. The dinner invitation came 6 weeks before the event. My parents were hosting a celebration for Derek's appointment, 60 guests, St. Hadley Hotel, cocktails at 7, dinner at 8. Formal attire encouraged. Derek would have the opportunity to be introduced to several senior physicians from the hospital as well as the chief of surgery, Dr. Telth, Raymond Okafor, who my mother mentioned 3 times in the invitation email by full name and title, as though repetition would convey the weight. I told Marcus about the seating arrangement the same night I found out. He was quiet for a moment, then asked if I wanted to skip it. I thought about it seriously. The way I'd learned to think about questions from him, without the automatic response my family had trained into me. In the end, I said no. I said I needed to go and see it one last time without pretending it was something else. And then I was done. He said, "Then I'll be there." I wore a dark green dress I had owned for 2 years. My mother had sent a link to a powder pink cocktail dress from a boutique she liked, with a note that it would be lovely for a formal dinner and very appropriate for the occasion. I thanked her and wore the green dress. My parents met us at the entrance to the Carver room. My mother's eyes moved over the dress and then over Marcus, and she smiled the way she smiled when she was recalibrating. My father gave Marcus a handshake of the kind you give someone when you've already decided how much it matters. There was a moment where my father's eyes went to Marcus's blazer, then to his general presentation, and I watched him arrive at a conclusion and file it. The room was warm and full and exactly as described. White garden roses, handwritten brass-held place cards on the main tables. Derek and Amanda at the table closest to the small raised platform where the microphone was. Dr. Okafor and his wife at a round table near the window, the kind of placement that acknowledges importance without centering it too early. My mother had managed the logistics of this room with the precision of someone who understood that seating was a form of language. Our table was against the wall, rectangular. The laminated card. The coat check attendant who asked about my ticket. Marcus looked at the table. He looked at me. He pulled out my chair. Dr. Raymond Okafor was the first thing I noticed about the room that was different from what I expected. I had seen his photograph on the hospital's website when Derek had mentioned his name over the previous months. Silver-haired, composed, the kind of person who occupies a room without appearing to try. He was seated at his table with his wife, speaking with one of the senior physicians, and in the first 15 minutes I watched him glance in our direction twice. Both times his eyes settled on Marcus and then moved away. The third time, they did not move away. I watch him look at Marcus the way you watch someone try to place a name, the sequence of small recognitions working their way through a face. A slight furrow, a stillness. And then something close to disbelief, the specific expression of a person who has spotted something entirely out of context. My mother had arranged for brief remarks before dinner. My father stood first. He was good at rooms. He had the particular gift of making people feel the privilege of listening to him, and he used it without appearing to try, which is perhaps the most effective way to use it. He talked about Derek. He talked about the years of training, the discipline, the sacrifices, the pride. He was specific and accurate, and genuinely warm in a way that I had watched him be with Derek my entire life without once fully understanding what it cost me to witness it until much later. Derek has never once allowed difficulty to redirect him, my father said. Every obstacle became a step. We are so proud to be here tonight celebrating what he has built. The room responded with the warmth the room gives when it believes what it's hearing. Then my father looked at me. It was the look of someone executing something planned, calibrated in advance, designed to land as generosity while functioning as its opposite. He said, and of course our daughter Claire is here as well. She works as a nurse at the trauma center, the kind of important support work that keeps hospitals running. He paused. We're proud of her dedication too. The pause before dedication too. The pause before dedication carried more weight than anything he said before it. Then he looked directly at Marcus with the mild, pleasant expression of a man who has just made something clear without saying it plainly. And her guest tonight works in logistics. He raised his glass toward our table with the particular smile of someone who knows a room is watching and has chosen what that room should see. To family, he said, and the room raised its glasses. 60 people glanced in our direction. I picked up my water glass and held it. I did not look at my father. I did not look at any of them. What happened next happened in about 30 seconds of real time. Marcus set down his fork. He did not push back his chair dramatically. He did not clear his throat. He simply stood up, the way a person stands up when they have decided to without performance, and the room registered it the way a room registers a window opening in a sealed space, a change in pressure more than anything you could point to directly. Dr. Cleason. Okafor rose from his table at almost the same moment. He crossed the room from the window side, past the main tables, toward the coat check wall, and the whole room watched him do it with the expression of 60 people recalculating something. He walked the way a person walks when they know what they're doing and have already decided to do it. He stopped at our table. Marcus, he said. His voice was even, but the room had gone quiet, and even was enough. I thought that was you, he said. He looked at me briefly, then at my parents. My father had stood at some point in the last 10 seconds. My mother's hands were still on the table. Raymond, my father said carefully, you know Claire's guest? Dr. Okafor looked at my father with an expression I recognized from the ICU, from the faces of attending physicians, deciding how much to explain and to whom. He said, Warren. This is Marcus Webb. He runs Reed Webb Capital, one of the larger private healthcare infrastructure funds in the region. In the last 4 years, his fund has committed close to $60 million to rural hospital systems across 6 states. 3 facilities in this state alone exist in their current operational form because of capital his fund provided. He paused. He also serves on the board of the National Rural Health Equity Initiative, which, he glanced at Derek, is something we've been trying to get your hospital formally partnered with for 2 years. He looked back at my father. I've been trying to get Marcus into a room with our administration for 18 months. He keeps finding reasons not to take the meeting. Another pause. I understand now why his schedule might have been complicated. My father opened his mouth. Something behind his eyes was working through something I had watched him work through before. The recalibration you do when you've made a commitment in public, and the ground has shifted underneath it. Nothing came out. Marcus did not look at my father. He looked at the room, calmly, the way a person looks at a room they have decided to speak honestly in. He said, "I didn't come tonight to correct anyone's impression of me. I came because Claire asked me to be here and because she is the most genuinely skilled and quietly courageous person I have been in a room with in a long time." He said this without raising his voice. The room was quiet enough that he didn't need to. "She works 60-hour weeks in a trauma ICU," he said. "She makes decisions under pressure that most people couldn't hold together for 30 seconds. She told me once about spending 3 hours sitting with a patient's family through something unsurvivable because no one else was available, and she decided that no one should have to go through that alone. That is not support work." He looked briefly at my father. "That is the actual work." He sat back down. The silence lasted long enough to be its own kind of sentence. Then I stood up. My legs were not as steady as I would have liked, but my voice was. I looked at my parents, and I said what I had been composing and recomposing and setting aside for 8 years, which was simply the true version of things without the softening I had always applied before. I said, "You have been telling me what my work is worth for my entire adult life, not always in words, in every introduction where you paused before my name, in every dinner conversation that moved past me to Derek, in every moment where my accomplishments needed a qualifier to be mentionable. I don't say this to perform anything. I say it because I'm done adjusting myself to fit what's left over after everyone else gets the full version of your attention." My mother was looking at the table. I said, "I'm leaving." I looked at Marcus, and he was already standing. We walked out together through the carver room with 60 people watching and the coat check attendant holding the door open because that was his job, and it happened to be the right moment. The drive home was quiet in the way that quiet can be full rather than empty. Marcus kept one hand on the wheel and the other near the gear shift, and I watched the streetlights pass and felt something I didn't have a name for yet, something between exhaustion and a very specific relief. Like a sound that had been playing in a room for so long you'd stopped hearing it and now it had stopped. Derek called me 2 days later. He didn't lead with apology. He led with the thing he'd been doing for years, which was trying to exist in the middle without being accountable to either side of it. He said the dinner had been a lot. I said yes. He said Mom and Dad were pretty shaken up. I said I imagine they were. He said, "I want you to know I saw what they did and I wasn't comfortable with it." I said, "Derek, you've been seeing what they've done for 20 years and being uncomfortable with it. Being uncomfortable is not the same as saying something." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You're right." And there was enough honesty in those 2 words that I stayed on the phone. Dr. Okafor, as I later found out through Derek, had quietly withdrawn his attendance from 2 upcoming fundraising events that my father had been scheduled to co-chair. The explanation relayed was a conflict of professional priorities. 2 physicians who had been at the dinner sent notes to the event organizers of a medical conference my mother had been planning to speak at, raising questions about the appropriateness of the invitation. The conference coordinator called her the following week. 3 weeks after the dinner, a senior colleague of my father's took him to lunch and told him privately that the incident had circulated among people who mattered to him professionally, and that perception had shifted in ways that would take time to repair. My father called me that same evening. He said, "I need you to know that what I said at the dinner was wrong. That I have been saying versions of it for years in ways that were wrong." I asked him if he was calling because he understood what he had done or because he was experiencing consequences for it. He was silent for what felt like a full minute. Then he said, "Both things are true. I want to try to fix the one I have control over." That honesty cost him something. I heard the cost in his silence before it. I had spent years listening to my father speak with complete fluency and confidence, and that silence was different from anything I had heard from him before. I told him what I needed. I needed 12 weeks of family therapy. I needed a session at the beginning where I spoke about my experience without interruption, without reframing, without my parents offering context for their choices until I had finished saying mine. And I needed to know it was not conditional on my forgiveness, because forgiveness was not something I could promise in advance, and any arrangement built on that promise would not be real. My mother agreed by the end of the next day, without negotiating the terms. That surprised me more than anything else. The first session was held in a quiet office on the north side of the city. A therapist with a manner that reminded me of the best attending physicians I had worked with, present, unhurried, unimpressed by performance. I talked for 40 minutes. I said things I had been organizing in my head for years without a place to put them. My parents sat across from me and they listened. The sessions after that were harder in different ways. Some weeks we made something that resembled progress. Some weeks we sat in the room together and simply did not leave. And I came to understand that sometimes the act of not leaving was the progress. My mother cried during the third session, not the performative kind of crying I had seen at family events, but something quieter and more private that she clearly had not planned to do. My father did not cry, but he went very still in a way that I recognized from surgery consults, from the faces of people absorbing something true. I don't know what we will become. I have stopped needing to know in advance. What I know is that I drive home from those sessions and sit in the car for a few minutes before going inside. And the feeling that I am adjusting to is not the vindication I might have predicted years ago if you had told me this story was coming. It is something quieter and harder to name. A sense of being precisely the size I am, without the ongoing work of making myself smaller. Marcus was at his kitchen table with his laptop when I arrived after the first session. He looked up. I sat down across from him and said, "I think it's going to be okay." He said, "Yeah?" I said, "I don't know what okay looks like exactly, but I think I'm moving toward it." He closed the laptop and made coffee, and we sat at the table while the evening came in through the window, and I did not feel the need to explain or qualify or reduce any part of what I had just said. There's something I have been thinking about since the dinner, about Marcus specifically. My parents assessed him against a scale they had assembled over decades: credentials, title, the right kind of visible achievement, and he registered as light. He was quietly running one of the most consequential healthcare investment operations in the region. He had funded the existence of clinics that people in rural counties depended on for care that would otherwise have required a 3-hour drive or not happened at all. He had done this without a title on his car or his clothing or his conversation, because he did not need the surface to confirm the substance. I have thought about how much of my life I spent trying to make my work legible to people who had already decided what it was worth, the protocols I helped design, the families I sat with at 2 in the morning, the patients who made it because someone who knew what they were doing was paying attention at the right moment. I tried to translate all of it into language my family could receive, and it was never quite the right translation because the problem was never the language. The problem was that they had already filed me before they had read me. My brother Derek told me last month that he has started to think differently about the people he works with in the hospital. He said there was a nurse in his unit who had been there for 12 years, and he realized recently that he had never once asked her what she thought about a patient's care plan, even though her instincts were frequently better than his own. He said he was trying to change that. I said I thought that was worth trying. Brooke in the original story forgave too easily, someone in the comments said. I used to think forgiveness too quickly was the weak choice. Now I think the question isn't whether to forgive. The question isn't whether to forgive. The question is what you require to be true before it means anything. Conditional honesty is still honesty. A door opened from the inside is still open. There's a patient I think about sometimes. A man in his early 60s who came into the trauma unit after a car accident and spent 3 weeks relearning how to coordinate his left hand. He had been a woodworker before. On his last day before discharge, he asked me, "Is this going to come back?" Meaning the dexterity, the ease. I told him I didn't know, that the brain was working and that the work he'd done was real and that the rest was time and practice. He said, "But I'm different now." I said, "Yes, but different doesn't mean less." I think about that conversation more than I expected to. I think about what it means to be good at a thing that no one in the right rooms has ever seen you doing. I think about how many people are sitting at table 11 right now, near a coat check, with a laminated card and a water glass, doing work that is invisible to everyone who would benefit from seeing it. So let me ask you something before I finish. Is there someone in your life, a colleague, a person you grew up with, someone at the edge of your attention, whose value you decided early before you had the full picture, before you knew what they were building, what they were carrying, what they were capable of in the room when no one important was watching? Because the person who mattered most in my story was not introduced at a head table. He was sitting near the coat check, and he was the only one in the room who had driven there knowing exactly what the night was going to look like and shown up for it anyway. That tells you most of what you need to know.